Welcome to the Spoiler Alert Podcast. We're your hosts, Dakota Scott on that side of me, and then I'm Nate Krenz. And today we're going to review David Fincher's Seven. It was made in 1995. It stars Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt. And this was one of, if I believe the game came after Seven. So this would have been Fincher. This would have been Fincher's follow-up to Alien 3, which is a movie that we also just did. So David Fincher, early lead for our most reviewed director. This is really the first true David Fincher film for me, because this is the one where there was enough control on set that he could get the product he wanted clearly.
I think we talked about what an absolute nightmare Alien 3 was. So
an interesting thing that I didn't see, because we had kind of discussed before.
I know, I noticed too. And I looked them up because this is a really good script. And then 8mm, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, and just in general, we were talking in the Alien 3 movie about how it's not really a knock on him because not every director has to be a writer, but he sticks to writers that he enjoys working with, that he has success with. And this one, the guy's name is Andrew Kevin Walker. And I noticed that he wrote The Game, which is a movie that I believe was the next feature-length film that
it's like Michael Douglas, and I've always intended to watch. I haven't gotten around to. So I think it's the only Fincher film I haven't seen.
I think I am in the same boat with you, so maybe we could watch it somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
But I do know it's like this psychological thriller type,
I'm pretty hazy on Panic Room, so I don't even know if I finished that. But
another interesting thing is that he worked as a script doctor on a few different projects that were pretty interesting, because he was a script doctor on Fight Club. He was a script doctor on, I believe he wrote The Game in completion. Otherwise, he may have been a script doctor on that. And then he was also a script doctor on Event Horizon, which is, I know, a movie that you appreciate quite a bit.
I do. But I mean, I know a lot of people. I think that was one of those where you had a few people working on it. So, well, obviously, if you have script doctors working on them, but obviously there are a few hands in the kitchen, or whatever the expression is. But I think it's something that became very different from the original script in a lot of ways. But for the better, actually, because it was going to be kind of just this. It's irrelevant, but it was just going to be a more fun house, like haunted ship in space. And then what got really juicy for me was the idea of making it Hellraiser in space, which I actually did with Hellraiser 4, but it sucked. So, but this did it justice. Event Horizon is one of the creepiest fucking movies. I saw that as a kid. It fucked me up. But 8mm has a lot of great ideas, like 7. It's just not quite as cohesive, and there are some glaring plot holes. But it's ultimately, at the end of this one, I would recommend, if you like 7. It's kind of close enough. Yeah, that I might recommend it.
And if there's anything that Joel Schumacher has done that's kind of, more on the respectable side of things, it's probably more of the psychological thriller types, because Falling Down is regarded as probably his best film. Falling Down has its own problems, but it's still regarded in that way.
The thing with Schumacher's movie, another here, this is kind of weird to be doing it at the start, but another one I'd actually recommend would be Phone Booth, and that was I actually really like Phone Booth.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it in a long time. It is probably riddled with some plot holes. Anyway, but that's one that's kind of similar. You have this Punisher type, but so I kind of a mixed legacy, but he definitely seems to attach himself to really great concepts. And he just doesn't always bring them home. I guess I was going to recommend those 2 movies, 8mm, and which I think he directed, didn't he? And then Phone Booth would actually be one of my recommendations. They're certainly not up there in quality with Seven, but they might be a good follow-up. So I think Zodiac would be a good follow-up, and maybe if Dragon Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and if you want to see obviously Brad Pitt in another David Fincher film, Fight Club and Curious Case of Benjamin Button. So those I guess would be my recommendations.
I just say maybe Silence of the Lambs, because it's definitely a different sort of.
And actually, that was only like three years later. That's interesting to think about how stylistically different those two movies are, but they're very close, actually, like proximity wise.
One thing we pick up pretty early in this movie is the entire first hour 20 or so, or hour and a half of the movie before John Doe reveals himself is rain. I did not hear this from any David Fincher interview or anything, but I have heard, they took some influence from Blade Runner for that portion of the movie, because with how just gloomy this world is, the constant rain kind of takes you there.
Rain isn't gloomy to me. That's my idea of a good day. I love the fucking rain. But no, I suppose, it's dreary for most people. I love the visuals. I mean, so that's kind of how I was like, it really reveals what it's about. And I think really only a couple pivotal scenes that really frame the rest of the movie. But as far as just pretty shots, there's one where Brad Pitt's hanging his head over his steering wheel in his car. And I mean, there's nothing special about that. He's just struggling with reading, what was it, the Canterbury Tales. And, I think somebody runs him the For Dummies version or the Cliff Notes or whatever the fuck, there's nothing special about that scene, but I just thought this is the most beautiful somebody hanging their head in their fucking car scene I've ever seen. It's shot beautifully. There's an atmosphere to this that really does kind of immerse you.
You do make a point that I really like, bringing up the word atmosphere, because that's one thing that consistently Fincher is great at capturing, whether it's capturing a super sterile and kind of clean atmosphere in The Social Network, or a kind of rustic, sweaty, musky sort of atmosphere in Fight Club, or you know what I mean? He's great at capturing, you can almost smell his movies.
No, actually, The Social Network's a really interesting one because it kind of almost breaks the tradition, to my mind, of what I consider the look of David Fincher. I mean, that's almost more like Steven Soderbergh. There's, it's kind of cold and distant, but it just shows he's first. I guess Gone Girl to some degree was kind of shot like that.
He was one of the first very, very talented directors to kind of plunge himself into digital cameras.
Really?
Because there was still a lot of 35 millimeter, 2010 back through the aughts backwards. I believe
we've lost that battle by now. Is anybody still? I know Tarantino's the light.
Tarantino does. I know they did at least one of the Star Wars on 35. One of the new ones. There's been some episodes of Game of Thrones, some good episodes of Game of Thrones that use 35 millimeter in specific scenes, because otherwise that's a very digital and sterile style otherwise.
It is hard to defend nowadays. It's gotten good enough. Certainly that was an argument that was compelling if you look at the early 2000s, where digital had a lot of catching up to do, but now it's there's something, but I don't know how nostalgic I'm being about it. I do think there's a graininess and something to the blacks and whatever, but maybe I'm just blurry.
I mean, there's going to be something that's, hopefully not lost forever from the Prince of Darkness, the dude that did the director of photography for the Godfather movies. He was called the Prince of Darkness. And you can just tell in that movie, because there are some scenes where it's 75% black, and you just see Duvall's face or something just cracking through.
Fucking Apocalypse Now, because I love that dude. If he did Apocalypse Now,
he might have done that.
Yeah, because I've studied I love the shadow work in that fucking movie. Like I think a lot about that, like how much is too little visually, like information wise, and and like it's such a fine line. But God, there's a power to just black.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Apocalypse Now, and my favorite scenes are the glistening of the fucking eye. Like you can barely make out anything else but the glistening eye, and just all this darkness. Like there's something so evocative. So if that's the same, that sounds in line with like how I think about that movie. So it's probably the same guy.
Yeah, it very well might be the same guy because it's Coppola, of
Yeah.
course. But at the very least, it's Coppola having like very strong taste in, who he chooses to shoot his film. But yeah, like there's always going to be something, kind of lost with 35 millimeter kind of transitioning out. David Fincher has truly mastered shooting digitally, though. So it still has that same warmth of the 35 mil type
This
movies, I think.
this won't be a popular opinion, and I won't go too far off, but like I do kind of study the early 2000s and digital, and like I watch shows shot with that, like I mean 24 or Michael Mann's Collateral, and as ugly as they look, or some Steven Soderbergh, like there's an identity there. It really does kind of encapsulate that decade, and I'm drawn to it too. So I that might almost be a fucking art. Like we might see, it's unlikely it won't be on the same level, certainly, but you might actually see a resurgence maybe someday of people shooting with like really shitty digital cameras, just to capture that sort of look. I think that's just going to always be a thing.
But yep, so I believe the first scene that we actually get in the movie is like them starting their days where like I think it might have just been Morgan Freeman doing the dishes or getting ready for work, and then they walk in on a murder scene, and it's actually before Gluttony, and
Yeah,
I kind of forget about it because it doesn't really have an effect on the rest of the movie. It's like a cold
right.
open, and then like
It, it
it
is.
just sets the tone of how gloomy the world is and kind of where Morgan Freeman is at with it.
Yeah, no, that's the important thing, is that it sets up that Morgan Freeman, the one guy, what is it that Morgan Freeman, he asked if the kids saw the murder, and the guy says, who gives a fuck? It's not part of the job, like obviously there's a certain degree of apathy there, and it shows that Morgan Freeman, as much as he likes to, sort of espouse, not quite nihilistic rhetoric, but whatever you'd call, I mean, he's hard boiled, I mean, but it shows that he cares. I think, like he still cares about the effects of these things, whereas this guy's just so desensitized. He's like, who gives a fuck? It's completely irrelevant to what we're doing here. It's just a matter of fact. I think that's the only scene really that shows he hasn't fully, uh, you know, accepted the world around him. He's not ready to get on the level that everybody around, all of his peers are, in terms of just being like, oh yeah, things are just this shitty, who gives a fuck. He does give a fuck, even if he doesn't want to. It hurts to give a fuck, and that kind of comes up later.
This is a simple setup scene. It's like fuck you. This is not going to be an optimistic movie, like from the jump. I mean,
you know
Silence of the Lambs is a more optimistic film. It
I I think this is a moral film ultimately, which is really surprising upon revisiting it. Like it's surprisingly moralistic, but it's doesn't feel good. I think that's why it's still so powerful. I was really, for most of it, I felt like it was a 4, and then when we got to that last conversation between Pitt and Morgan Freeman at the bar, I started to remember what I loved so much about it. And then by that ending scene, yeah, it's absolutely actually as good as I remembered it being. So I remembered it being style over substance, which is something that Fincher's accused of a lot. And no, this movie covers its ass. Like as far as the murders, I remember them being very over the top and Saw-like, but they're very clinically described. Like it doesn't feel unrealistic, and that's something that I misremembered.
one thing that is consistent through most of David Fincher's films is he likes to kick it off with a badass opening credit sequence. We're gonna
Yes.
talk about this. The one in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo fucking is
Yeah.
killer. That's one of his better one. Like that opening credit sequence might be better than that entire movie. The Social Network it's not as extreme as the others, but it's like uh Zuckerberg, Eisenberg walking through the campus basically, and it's just to the soft Nine Inch Nails boom ba-dum.
Well, I think that was Trent Reznor Beyond 9 Inches. So it was
Right,
him
right,
and
yeah.
Loss, yeah, which is actually that's a lot more subdued. It's not the industrial thing, what you'd associate with 9 Inch. That kind of, but yeah, actually, Social Network. I mean, it's something that is just kind of a given nowadays, especially with television. But I don't know if you remember a lot of talks about like the opening credit sequences of television nowadays. Like people seem to kind of be aware of the shift from what that looked like in the 2000s, what that looked like. Every decade has its version of it. It really felt like the 2010s was a lot more in line with like say something like a Fincher opening credit sequence.
I agree because you have 2010, so you have okay, so Social Network we just explained wasn't the most extreme version from Fincher. Like even
But it's still
Fight Clubs was more extreme too. But like your point is correct though, because what comes right after 2010? You have 2011, which is Dragon Tattoo. It's Game of Thrones, which badass opening credit sequence, especially for the time. That's just like a big thing with HBO too, I think, because HBO really tries to one up themselves and often succeed with getting great opening credit sequences. All three of the True Detective seasons have good opening credit sequences.
Newsroom?
No, not Newsroom has a really good one. Yeah, you're right. But yeah, so for this film specifically, most of this opening credit sequences, you see like the sketchy ass font that like inverts and reverts, like flips upside down and right side up.
That continues in the end credits where they you wouldn't know it except for that very beginning of it, like where they're actually playing in reverse. But reverse and forwards, looks the same once you get past the start of it. But yeah, so
yeah, and it's set to sort of edited version of Nine Inch Nails Closer.
Yeah.
And like there's like some strobe effects too, I believe. And one of the things you see really quick is like this guy taking like you don't see his face or anything, you just see fingers slicing off his own fingerprints with a razor and taping
I
them
don't
back
remember
up.
that actually, but yeah, I remember it coming up later in the film. That's bizarre. You'd think I'd remember that. That sounds fucked up, but no, I remember them talking about how he's removed his fingerprints. So yeah, okay. So they're setting that up in the credits.
Yep, and in the interrogation room, you remember when he grabs like the tea bag and you kind of see it like this, and he has bandaged fingers. That's why.
Oh, I didn't see that. So he did that recently. Like he's been planning this for a long time, and he just started to do. Okay.
I think the forensic person says that he has to cut off his fingerprints like every week because it grows back so quick, or like every few days.
Was that true? I didn't think. I thought it would just scar over to the point of like where you couldn't recognize.
I think your DNA. I don't know, but I think your DNA is still like coded to be like grow this way, grow with these fingerprints.
Okay. I would think it'd just be like scar tissue, but no. I mean, you might be right. Yeah, fuck. Okay, well it's cool that they're setting stuff up early on in the credits. I didn't realize somehow. It's the Nine Inch Nails song Closer, and they don't use any of the lyrics except that last one, you get me closer to God, and that plays. I think it's a little misleading because I think ultimately the movie doesn't become so much a movie about somebody who's a religious fanatic. But I think it might misdirect, maybe intentionally. Certainly the themes are very religious, but I think what he's ultimately trying to accomplish are the movie kind of defines its parameters later on is like, God works in mysterious ways. It's about the extent that the movie's concerned about its religious themes. It's much more concerned about society at large or whatever. But so I don't know if that was deliberate or not. It's either deliberately misleading or not.
And then, so just jumping in the first murder here, well, really moments before the first murder, we Brad Pitt's character, his name is Mills. He gets reassigned to work with Morgan Freeman's character for the day, Somerset. And they're both detectives. Mills is younger, kind of more optimistic. We'll get a little more into the characterizations in a bit. Morgan Freeman, is this surly, lost of hope kind of guy that, doesn't like the world around him. So they go in and look at this crime scene. And in the crime scene, there's this massively overweight man who has his legs tied together, tied to a chair, and he's dead, having like fallen face first into a big plate of spaghetti. And there's buckets of puke, there's like all kinds of stuff. They deduce that the killer had been forcing him at gunpoint to eat and like eat himself to death. And then the coroner looks at the.
I got the spaghetti sauce in the background.
Nice. And then the coroner deduces that, like you said, that there was enough in his stomach to like split his stomach open, but the killer must have gotten impatient or something and just kicked him right in the stomach, and then that's what made
just
it
being
worse.
a fucker. Yeah, he ruptured internally. Yeah, I mean, they're saying he probably would have died anyway, but it just sped the process along. But yeah, so, which I mean, I liked that wasn't something ridiculous. Like he literally ate to the point of bursting, because I'm like, I don't know, but I'm sure you'd almost certainly die of something else before that point. When I think about the movie, it's that first death that I think really sets the tone for me. Like, I'm like, that's a really fucked up way of killing somebody. So that's kind of how I remember Seven. Like that's bad.
Gluttony might be the most innocent of the bunch too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, well, the greed and the sloth guy were real pieces of shit. Other than that, it was like a narcissist.
Well, it's a matter of
a prostitute and an overweight guy, and those.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the big deal with them? But like, that's the kind of like that's what wraps some things in. John Doe is like, hey, I bet you guys are even happy I did that one. They actually don't see the gluttony symbol until the next murder, which we'll get into in just a sec here, because they go back and check it out. There was some kind of like bickering among like the detective office or whatever. They say that, Mills, you're not going with Somerset on this one. So they reassign Mills again, and Mills is out on his own, but then he gets a murder the next day of this guy who's this big time defense attorney, probably let all kinds of bad people off of cases, and clear as day in his murder scene, in blood is written greed on the carpet.
And well, there was something to tip Morgan Freeman off in the previous murder, like, because that's where that whole conversation comes up. It was like where he recognizes there's going to be like 6 more of these murders, and he doesn't want to have this be his last case, because he knows it's going to go on. And you have kind of like this inversion of the usual trope where, the detective's like demanding to stay on the case, and it's a total inversion of that, where he's like, I don't want to do this fucking case. And the guy's like, it's, like it's nothing. You're seeing shit that ain't there and whatever. And, Freeman's like, no, this can't be my last case. It's going to go unfinished. Which actually I think thematically ties in with sort of his, maybe a little bit of his internal conflict, that he feels like he's not making a difference. He's not changing anything. And so he doesn't want to end on the note of like something that's going to clearly go on. But yeah, just, usually that scene would play out like, God damn it, you're whatever. It's like, get the fuck out of my office. You're off this case. Hand in your badge, and then they go off, right. That whole thing, so it's actually a total inversion of that, where he's like, asking to be taken off the case. So Brad Pitt wants to stay on, but he's too young and whatever, like they just totally dismiss him. Yeah.
I like the point you make about how he's just pretty much over. He's like implying that they're never going to save a person
No, yeah,
because
right. They're always there after the fact. They're always just taking inventory, basically. I understood what he's saying. That, yeah, I mean, and statistically, I mean, that's true. By the time 911's there, whatever's happened has happened.
Or like if
So
you're 48 hours missing, it's already like too late. You could be just without your phone for 24 hours, and people will be like, "Ah, no biggie," and then 48 hours, you already could be dead.
right. Well, I think it's 4 days that you have, and then past that, it's like you're dead.
I
So,
think they searched for you for 4 days or something
yeah,
like that,
and
like
then
intensely. Okay, so back with the greed one is how that guy is forced to basically kill himself is by 1 pound of flesh. And
which
then
is a death that Saw 6 imitates, like basically exactly, where they have to cut off, I think, about like 5 pounds, 5 pounds and whoever does it first gets to live. So I think there's like a lawyer woman who cuts off her arm or some shit in that one or something. But yeah, so Saw kind of rips off 7, I think, quite a lot. I think that maybe that's why 7 retroactively gets shit, maybe for like people see it as being a bit more superficial, when really it isn't. It just Saw
I
is
think
dumb and ripped it off,
the only reason I think the reason that people would think that 7 is more superficial than Saw or whatever is because we don't see the murders. But in reality we don't need to see him feeding a guy to death in like the first 10 minutes of the movie to realize that it's fucked up. Your imagination will do the work for you. You know what I
Right.
mean? And then you don't have to distract the audience with it.
Which
But you can still implant that thought into the audience's head and they're going to imagine it one way or another. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think anybody accuses. Sorry, yeah, I probably said it wrong. I mean, I think people recognize 7 as probably being superior to Saw, but I think they blame it for setting the example, going forward. And it's like I don't think you can really do that though. It's like Saw did what it was. It watered it down. It's a lot of things imitated 7, but there's a reason that they did that because 7 is good. The things that came after aren't necessarily, but you can't really fault it. The same thing with the credits. People thought that the credits were too flashy because things started to imitate that. I mean, that's just kind of a conversation that happened around. It's kind of died off now, but again, no, I don't think the credits interrupted the film. I thought they actually there's more information going on than even I realized. You're talking about him cutting off his fingertips, so yeah, I didn't think it was. But maybe that's just because I'm more used to it with modern television. So at the time, though, people thought it was too flashy. So
Yeah, that was pretty different. I can't think of any like pre-90s. I can't think of a lot of opening credit sequences like that.
right. Yeah,
So
and I mean, obviously, he's come from music videos. He's very stylistic. That was, but I don't think it's style over substance. I think it's, at least in the case of 7, and I'd say a lot of his other works, they're on par. I mean, there is style, but that doesn't mean it's at the expense of substance. So,
right after Mills sees this, Morgan Freeman goes back and because he sees the greed thing, and then he wanted to scope out the old gluttony scene again. And then he pulls the fridge out from behind and sees that gluttony's written in grease behind the fridge. Yeah.
Right.
And then he comes back and they're in the department and Morgan Freeman is like, 7 deadly sins. The next ones are going to be like sloth, lust, pride, greed, wrath. So then that's when he's pretty much like, I don't want any fucking part of this. I also don't think you should have Mills do it, but whatever. I don't want any part of it.
Right.
Because he's protective of Mills because Somerset was probably once upon a time, kind of ambitious, thinking that he could bring positive change to things. And that's definitely what you see in Mills, which is Pitt's character.
Well, and there's that hint of that again, I think, in that opening scene where he kind of betrays everything else throughout the rest of the movie in asking after the, like, did the children see it? So it's still, there's some part of him that thinks that's part of the job, like we're trying to help people. And, and the guy's like, who gives a fuck, So, yeah, but there's really nothing past that point. So I think, it's easy to forget, but it does kind of betray him.
Their chief or whatever put them both on the task together.
Just because they don't think it's going to go anywhere. They're like, you're seeing shit that ain't there. It's just, just investigate this murder and, you're done. And he's like, it's not going to be done. There's going to be more.
You see like two of like the warmer scenes that you'll get in the entire movie kind of back to back. And that's the library scene, the first one where, you could tell that Somerset is buddy with security guards at the, the library that he's probably spent, hours upon hours throughout his career going to, because we have the internet now, but like libraries were the shit. And, this was like, this was like,
easy to be smart nowadays, but you had to put the effort in back then. So yeah.
And this came out exactly in 1995 when the internet became widely available. Right. So that's pretty cool. I think that, it's like a 1995 movie, but still got to go back to the library to do any kind of real research.
It's possible that they're just, they're cops who retired and just got security work at the library, but he knows them from the old days or some shit, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how to read it, but
true.
But
yeah. Yeah, that's definitely possible too. But it brings likability to the character that it's such a grim movie that you want to take advantage of a scene where you can make a character likable. If, without these library scenes and him kind of having warm conversations or listening to the music with the security guards and stuff, you'll kind of just get, grumpy Morgan Freeman the entire movie, and it's a grim movie, and there's no waves to it. And it kind of goes without saying that Morgan Freeman's performance was excellent throughout the entire movie. So I just think that was a nice and important scene. And then right after that, we have the dinner scene with Mills and Somerset and Mills's newlywed wife, who is played by Gwyneth Paltrow, and her name is Tracy. I also wanted to ask, where do you think this film is set? Because everything screams
New York.
Screams New York for the first half of the film, and then we drive off like 30 minutes out of the city.
Yeah, the desert. I got a bit confused about that. Yeah.
It might be intentionally ambiguous, or because I know they filmed the whole thing in LA, but that much rain in LA, it's pretty. I think it's got to be pretty rare even back then.
Yeah, that's the thing that does it. Well, actually, I mean, I went out to San Diego where my brother's living. And it's like actually there's an entire season where it just gets overcast, and I mean, it didn't rain, but it was just gray skies. So we came in at like the worst time of the year, kind of winter, springtime. I mean, still gorgeous compared to hearing him complain about the fucking weather in San Diego. I'm like, God, it's like, it's only 70 degrees. It's like, okay. Anyway, I thought it was New York, but then you brought up the desert, and and then I think they even said something about being from like upstate. And I mean, I always think of like that would make sense with New York. It's upstate New York where it's rural and there's farmland and whatever. There are other things that don't add up though, like and so this is one that's a little complicated. It's like Pitt's accent comes through a bit, and he says that they were high school sweethearts. And I'm like, but she doesn't have an accent. So I don't like say they're from somewhere else and then they moved again. She should kind of carry the accent with them. I mean, but so that makes things a little confusing. It's probably just more likely that Pitt couldn't lose his accent,
Yeah, I don't know if it's intentionally ambiguous or if it's just, you know, a mistake in the film, which it very well could be. And at this point, I don't think I've never thought of Brad Pitt as much of an accent actor.
No, right. But it just makes, it's like if they were high school sweethearts, it stands to reason she would probably carry the accent too, you know, I mean, because
Right.
it's possible he moved during high school and then to wherever. I mean, like, I'm probably overthinking this, but yeah, I mean,
this movie is potentially geographically challenged. So
it is.
It is a fair point to bring up. I think it's.
Well, A Midnight Meat Train, which is a movie I love, I mean, shoots with the very heavy implication that it's New York. I mean, it's New York in all but name, but they did shoot that in LA. So, I mean, cities just kind of all look alike. So, I mean.
And I think that's one thing. I think it might have been the case where he wanted to make it look like it could be any city. And that it's just cities. Might have been the point. Like it could be Detroit, could be Houston, could be Miami. You know what I mean? It's just
I didn't even consider that, but I like that a lot better. That just any fucking city.
Yeah, like that's what I mean by it's either geographically challenged or intentionally ambiguous. Because if it wants to be,
or it accidentally works out.
Yeah, exactly. It might accidentally work out, but I think one of the things it does do is it opens the door and it's like, this is American City. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the dinner at David Mills and Tracy Mills' new apartment complex or whatever, they have like some art pieces throughout the house. They play music on like records and stuff. They have quite a bit of records. They're kind of like this modern sort of like modern 90s couple that, you know, has a lot of hope and a lot of aspirations for life.
One thing I think that stood out to me a lot was that Brad Pitt's character, Mills, right? It feels very childish. So they seem really committed to playing that aspect of his character up. Like he does feel, he has this childlike sort of innocence to him. And it's something that certainly comes into play, and I think is a point that the movie's really trying to make throughout, but certainly at the end. They do there's some nice visual touches, I think, kind of back that I don't know if this is intentional or not. But his trench coat, for one thing, like to me looks a little too big, sort of like he's a kid and, you know, oversized clothes.
That's probably intentional. Yeah.
There was another one that I'm not sure about if it was just like, you know, but it was Pitt holds the gun at a slightly like downward angle, like it's heavy in his hands, almost like a kid picking up, you know, a gun or something. Like, so that might just be, you know,
him and Tracy have kind of like this fun, like this sort of like funny, like you were saying, innocent relationship where
that's what stuck out to me.
She calls him Serpico too, almost like she calls him Serpico like on his first day on the new job, almost like, you know, like someone's parent would like have like a nickname for them on the first day of school. You know what I mean? Like, oh, look at you. You're all Serpico out here. Our little Serpico. Like, it's kind of got that. Yeah, I definitely see. I didn't see that in the beginning, that like just how innocent they do play him out to be. But pointing out like the dress, like that makes a lot of sense to me.
I thought they played it up a lot to the point where the character didn't necessarily feel realistic, but it felt more allegorical. And so in that way, I think that might have been Fincher working around Pitt, where it's like, okay, I'm not going to get an Oscar win here, but I can make you into a character. And who knows how much of that's in the script or what. But I mean, Pitt's never sunk a movie, but he's certainly never been like the thing to make it acting wise. I mean, he brings the audiences in, I suppose. But, you know, here he was probably pretty early in his career, right? I mean, this is around the time he's like in that Tales of the Crypt episode that is probably the earliest I remember seeing him.
Thelma and Louise, I think, was 92.
But he seems so much younger to me than he actually, because I did the math on it. Oh yeah, he'd be 32, but he just, I mean, looks and acts a lot younger, I think, than that. So it was something to me that that stood out. And I think it ties together with the point the movie was trying to make. But
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they really tried to make him look as green as possible compared to Somerset, who like is like you said, borderline nihilistic, but
he
him
wants to be, but he can't quite get there. He's in a really painful position.
he yeah,
So
he almost would rather be completely cut off, you know what I
right.
mean? But he still has a good enough heart that maybe it'll work out this time, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like it never does for the guy.
But as far as Tracy and Pitt, yeah, there's also kind of this just like schoolyard thing they have. Like he's like hi loser, and she's like hi idiot, and it's just again, I mean, to me, it really was playing up the. And not that that's completely unrealistic, but it just I think they're really trying to hit that point home that they're
Yeah,
almost children.
it's the early couple phase. Like one of the things I wrote down here is like the thing that she liked him the most about him was he was like the funniest guy she ever met.
Oh,
So
she
there's
say
a
that?
yeah, yeah. I think they say that at the diner, and the diner is an important scene because the diner scene is just between Somerset, so Morgan Freeman, and Tracy, Gwyneth Paltrow, and she wants to meet with Somerset and talk about Dave and talk about like what she reveals to him is that Tracy is pregnant.
Yeah,
And
I think there's a subtler thing in the dinner sequence that sets up the diner a bit, and it's I mean, well, there's a lot throughout, but where he kind of Brad Pitt's kind of I will not try hard, but he's sort of prideful, and like so you get this sense that I mean, it's not like he dragged her along against her will necessarily. I mean, like she knew she had to kind of go along with it because he's he's prideful, he's sensitive, and she can't really probably find the way to say anything without it getting to him. I think that's obviously very evident in the whole fact that she's talking to Freeman. She has nobody to talk to. Like because she doesn't want to hurt him because he's he what's this acts like his shit don't stink, but she knows it would get to him, and so she doesn't know who to talk to, but she's afraid of this. And there's that line at the dinner sequence where it just reminded me of like some dumb shit thing where it's like she's like, how do you like the city? And he's like, I don't even know what the fuck he says, but basically like I've been here too long or something. And that was a line that might have fell flat or might have sounded like he's trying too hard to sound hard boiled, but like the way he says it, just like it's like what anybody would think after living here long enough. And then he realizes, oh shit, they just got here. But maybe you'll like it. And he just like tries to correct. It confirms for her what she already suspects, that this place sucks. And the train shakes the whole house, and like it basically becomes evident that they got fucked over, which just really kind of sets the tone for the city. Like the realtor guy fucked them over, and it's all downhill from there. And and Freeman and Paltrow kind of laugh it up because I think they have a sort of understanding, and Pitt's kind of like because he's prideful about it. It's like, okay, yeah, you got fucked by the realtor, just shut up. And I mean, so I think that whole dynamic that plays out, I think really highlights everything. So it might seem like a scene about nothing, but it really tells you a lot.
Yeah, you're right there because it says he's like the realtor only brought us here 5 minutes at a time, and that's
right.
kind of like you only see like it seems like society only shows the good parts of like detective work, at least to Mills. You know what I mean? So like, and he
Sure.
only saw those 5 minutes at a time, where it's
Right.
like
Yeah, something there.
growing up, like the good guy catches the bad guy, like, and he's like a kid, like watching, some kind of cop show or the A-Team or some shit.
I wouldn't say he's totally delusional because I mean he sees the same things that Freeman sees, but it ties together with I think my ultimate point at the end of the film. So I'll probably reserve it for that. But he has a sort of armor on that I think gets stripped away at the end of the picture. So
definitely
that allows him to see those things and persevere.
Tracy, reveals that she's pregnant, and like you were saying, like she's kind of talking to Somerset about this because she doesn't know how Brad Pitt's going to take it. And a part of that is a maturity level too, because he's not the most mature. He's been focused just on his job, like on the job, like most of his life or whatever, and being good at that. So if something got in between him doing the job, like how would it affect him?
She's relatively innocent too, but I think she has the sense that she's in over her head. She, like, I think she sees something that obviously Pitt's character, as the movie goes on, refuses to see, or has at least a vague awareness of it. And yeah, as you might, being a policeman's wife, I mean, I'm sure that's something that's probably on your mind, is that, you're in harm's way all the time, and that's probably an anxiety, whereas he probably thinks it's no big deal. And so I think that's something that she's becoming all the more aware of now that they're in a dangerous place that she feels very alone in and very unfamiliar with. But as far as that whole conversation, it's not so much about how he'd handle her pregnancy. He'd probably be fine with it. It's I think she's aware of the city she's in. She's aware of sort of the ugliness of it. And I think they're it's not enough to deter her, but there probably are those questions of like, what kind of world is this to live in, that are starting to occur to her. And I think she senses those in Freeman. And I think that's why they're she's drawn to that. So,
Yeah. And then Freeman too he kind of responds like with his own personal story of when he got like his wife at the time pregnant. They like he pressured her to have the abortion, and then is basically what he revealed. So like he definitely harbors some level of either regret, whether it just means that he regrets going into the force to begin with and seeing how shitty the world can be.
yeah.
Uh having like the best view of that, just to even make him make that decision. Uh to
Yeah, because he says,
wear her down.
I mean, obviously you're dealing with controversial themes, and so it's kind of difficult to work around, like, is the movie just trying to be but no, I think if it's a divisive issue, but what he says about it is like, I mean, I know I made the right choice because I mean, what he's saying in that is that the world's a shithole. And so in that sense, I made the right choice, but then he's plagued by, the idea that like, but there's not a day that goes by that I wish I'd made a different one. So I think that summarizes his character. I can't, I mean, I don't think there's a clear cut answer there. I think his character is as divided in that statement as he is across the rest of the film. He's just torn apart by the world, but he can't completely settle. He wants to just write off the world, but he can't quite. So he's halfway between Pitt and maybe that guy we see at the beginning of the picture. But it's a really uncomfortable place to be. And so there aren't any clear answers. I think it's a difficult, I think, scene in that sense, but because it like you said, you feel the characters kind of always contradictory, and you can't quite pin them down. And I think that's almost an admission of that in that scene, that he doesn't totally know how to take things. He knows they're shit, but it's not quite as simple as that. So
And an important thing too in that scene is Freeman tells her not to tell Pitt, because whatever her choice would be for doing the abortion or not, if she did the abortion, Mills might, blame himself and blame his own line of work for that abortion having been necessary. You know what I'm saying?
right.
And then if she makes the decision to keep the baby, Somerset still basically is still kind of saying, just try to keep him as focused as possible for the time being, because, well, this case specifically that they're on is a really fucking heavy case. They talk about how bad shit is every single day, where like a mugger stabbed a guy in the eyes just for like $40. But yeah, so either way, whatever her choice is for the abortion, Freeman is basically saying, like, don't tell him for now, because this is, without saying it, I think in his mind, he's like, we're on a pretty fucked up case. He'll figure it out when he figures it out. I'll probably be out, like, done off the force by then, by the time that
Well,
baby is born. So
I think another element at play before movie is just, I mean, she says she wants to keep it, and she's got her mind made up to do that. But I think he senses that there's enough doubt. I mean, just by nature of the conversation they're having, what she says and what she's feeling are probably at odds. So I think that's why, he almost sort of seems to acknowledge what she wanted, which is some doubt there as to whether she should bring a child into the world. But the third one in the bar is where the movie really clicked for me. I remembered how much I, loved it.
So I do not have the quote verbatim. But I had to skip back and replay what.
Same here, because like it wasn't until it was after, I'm like, well, that was really compelling.
Yeah. So this isn't verbatim. Somerset hates that people don't care, but at the same time he hates people himself. So that's a contradiction in its own way. And then he complains about apathy. He says he sympathizes with apathy, but doesn't think it should be virtuous. Is one of the big things he says at the bar. But he's the most apathetic person in this movie. But
he's not quite, but he wants to be desperately, I think.
Yeah. He doesn't think that the guy in the first scene that was like, who gives a shit if the kids saw it, he doesn't think that guy is virtuous in that way. You know what I mean? But he also sympathizes with that guy, because part of him is like, yeah, who does give a shit?
Well, Pitt points out the hypocrisy of Freeman basically saying that, what was it? It was he says something like, you're close, but it was, people don't care about each other or something like that. So, you just don't care about people because they're not worth caring about. If they don't care, then they're not worth caring about, which feeds it. So it just feeds into itself. It's like nothing's obviously going to change that way. And then the other idea there was, Freeman saying, a lot of things that resonate, it's easier to, to have a drug habit than it is to cope with day-to-day life and, the hardship there. And, it's easier to beat a child than it is to raise it, and life is hard. This is something certainly I feel, but it's, apathy has become the new morality, because everybody's kind of agreed that whatever's easiest is, as long as nobody's directly affecting anybody else, and then it's okay. And I think you see the extremes of that with Spacey's character later on, like how this is, well, that's a whole nother thing, but the morality of like indifference. And I feel like everybody's cheated by going Christianity and all these they're stupid because they hold me accountable. Atheism's stupid because, like, so I think we've really turned apathy into a religion. There's no accountability, and and as long as you,
I feel like where you get accountability though after that is more like in humanism, where you kind of want the human race to progress. But if you're pessimistic enough that, because like if you have faith or at least hope that the human race can kind of get their shit together, you could classify yourself as a humanist and basically operate without, like any like real theology.
Has been demonstrated though by what people have seemed to have adopted, en masse, is in that people don't give the human race as a collective much thought. They just, all this new age shit really shows what people truly value, and that's that I get to be special and I don't have to be accountable for anything at the same time. It feels so relevant to Spacey's character, because I think it's somebody who feels this way and then takes it to the extreme,
Like, yeah, that sort of thinking isn't like productive to like the human race, where I feel like people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and, very scientific thinkers and stuff that are still like kind of hopeful and have like, oh, isn't the world amazing? Their perspective is we as a human race are special because in all of space and time that is known to us, and aliens probably do exist in some way, shape, or form.
But as far as we know,
Like,
if we're all that there is, there's some
it's still
responsibility there.
the cosmic lottery of having a civilization half as advanced as we are is monumentally small. See, they see an entire universe worth of stuff and they're like, wow, we are special. And that's how they get positivity in their life. But if you say that to like someone that's like deep into astrology or whatever, it's got to be like, because Mars cared about the exact moment when I was born. And that's why I am the way I am. But they want to make it special for themselves.
This is another thing that's frustrating. So if you want to go to the other extreme, it's people that are like, you see like, oh, we found a new Earth, like in fucking, Alpha Centauri or something. There are people that are like, oh, great, humanity could just go fuck up that planet. I'm like, okay, if we're in all likelihood, like the mathematical odds are that there are other things. But as far as we know, we're the only people that exist. So we're the only people who can interpret the beauty of that planet. We're the only people who can, if we don't exist, then there's really no value out there in the universe because there's nothing sentient that can interpret it. And then Earth itself is going to be engulfed by like a solar flare or a fucking black hole. So it's not going to be here forever. The only hope of Earth continuing beyond Earth would be through us, as far as we know. So it's like, I think you can be too dismissive of humanity. Like we just suck and we shouldn't, we're just going to fuck everything up.
Yeah.
We're shitty caretakers, but we're all that there is. So I think striving for the best is the best thing to do. But
like some of the most, to me, like inspiring shit that I've like seen Neil deGrasse Tyson say about, like on his podcast and stuff is that in so many words, he would explain how life is in itself the universe expressing itself. Because
that's a beautiful way of looking at it. So.
Because life is kind of like art to the universe. Because all in this entire universe, there's a lack of life. There's dead space. There's like just crazy suns that are a million times the size of our sun, all kinds of like just crazy unlivable shit. And then there's this thing, like, from that life you have sentient beings that like perform art because and
the parallels between sentience and art are just as hard to define, really. What makes us different from we look at other animals. It was clearly
like a bird building a nest in a certain way. That
right.
You know what I mean?
But there's that undefined something that does separate us from other creatures, and there's that undefined something that makes something art, rather than just scenery or whatever.
I just think that perspective is a more productive one and more one that
rather than we can all just go to hell and I can't wait till cats and cockroaches and rats.
It's more productive than that for sure. And then it's also more productive than the I just need to feel good stuff. We all are special in the way that look at the fucking universe. Like that's how we're special. We're not super special in comparison to each other, I don't think. But when we compare us as an entirety, we are pretty special. But yeah, like he's apathetic and he doesn't think that being apathetic is virtuous, but he also realizes that he's apathetic and like Mills calls him out on it, he calls him out on the hypocrisy.
Normally that scene would play out in it'd just be the old hard-boiled bastard telling the new guy that how it is, right? And actually it ends up being quite the inversion.
All right, now Sloth actually, in the timeline of this movie, Sloth actually happens right after the first dinner scene in the apartment. They get the clue to go to Sloth because they go back to the crime scene at greed. The clue with the eyes, there was a picture on his desk with his wife with blood around her eyes, and that basically means like she knows. And then they flip the thing upside down, and then
Right. I remember that.
they feather the wall for fingerprints. And it's important to remember again that John Doe does not have fingerprints.
Right.
So he's actually using the cut off fingers of the next victim to write like "help me, I'm here" or whatever. And then that like kicks off like probably the scariest part of this movie, biggest jump scare at the very least, where
Oh yeah, sloth. Yeah.
yeah,
Actually, that got me this time too.
yeah, and they have this whole SWAT team going in and like storming in through this thing, and there's a big apartment, and there's a room that's just everything is just car air fresheners, and
Yeah.
there's this like rotted corpse of a person in the bed. Yeah, they ran the
Yeah.
DNA check on the sloth guy, and he's pederast. He's uh violent drug dealer,
Was oh
kind of
okay.
just like a scourge on society type of
But what made him
character.
sloth like? Like what made him lazy? Was that ever explicitly
That's
stated?
not explicitly like that's probably the loosest definition of one of the seven deadly sins in this movie, because they basically make it like he's a drug fiend, like
Which is
he'll
easy. It's the easy way out. He's escaping the responsibilities of life, so he's sloth like. Is that it or
yeah,
something?
I think that's John Doe's interpretation of things.
Which does seem to be quite loose, but
So the sloth guy just wakes up out of nowhere, scares the ever living shit out of Dr. Cox
and me it did
and
still.
me. And he has body parts missing. They took like piss and shit
I didn't notice that.
samples. No fingertips. I believe like he either swallowed or had his tongue cut off completely.
Yeah, I think it was like cut off so he couldn't kill himself that way or something. Or
Yeah.
yeah,
And like he had just been tied there for like I think exactly a year, and he was pumped full of antibiotics to keep him alive so that his skin didn't atrophy and infect. So
that was something I factored in. Like John Doe must have checked in regularly enough to turn him over, so he didn't develop bed sores. If you're in the healthcare, I mean, yeah, if somebody lays in one position for too long, it's fucked up. You'll develop these huge craters,
and then those infect and you can actually die from that.
right? So, but yeah, so somehow that came into play that John Doe must have checked in regularly enough to turn him over or something. I don't know what significance that was, but
Yeah, they left a ton of like John Doe left a ton of like really creepy like notes and you know
yeah,
sort of
that kind of
scientific stats behind and everything. Um, and then after the sloth scene, we get the scene in the diner where Somerset talks to Tracy about the pregnancy. And then after that, the next thing that happens is this chase. They get a lead actually through illegal means by asking by like kind of under the table getting information from the FBI about
yeah.
library book checkouts,
Mhm.
and so they can't actually use any of this in court. So that's that's kind of important in this scene. Um, but they go to this guy's house just to like question him a little bit, uh, and it turns out that it is John Doe, and he was just getting back with like groceries or supplies or whatever the fuck he had in like the grocery bags, and he just pulls out a gun and starts shooting at Mills and Somerset. And then a big chase
Yeah.
ensues, and Mills is going after him. Somerset really can't keep up, but Mills is hauling ass and close. And then basically ends with John Doe on top of a garbage truck, knocking, like, knocking,
He
bashing,
hits him with like a
bashing,
crowbar.
yeah, bashing Mills in the head with a crowbar or something. And then he pulls a gun to him. And to me, this is like one of the more fucked up things about the movie is that John Doe spares him. And you have
Yeah.
to think that,
What that
right?
means after that ending and what you
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah. Point is, he spares Brad Pitt's life only to not be finished with it.
Yeah, I mean, and just again, as far as superficial stuff, like that chase sequence is shot fantastically. I like that it goes on and on. Like, I mean, normally it'd be like, oh damn, we lost him. Like that scene goes on. Like they don't shake him, they chase his ass down. Even once it gets into the crowd, and then you think, oh fuck, it's over. It's still not. Brad Pitt chases him down an alley, and then gets ultimately cornered and hit with that crowbar. But also, I just think it's really impressive that they managed to mask him the whole time, not show his identity throughout that sequence. And it didn't feel really, I mean, it didn't break up the tension or anything. It in fact, I mean, it just enhanced it, the added mystery. But yeah, I like when he sees them at the end of the hall, and then he starts to continue to walk towards them. He's carrying groceries, and it's like kind of an oh shit thing. And then he just opens fire. Like it's really, and barely fucking misses them. So, yeah, I mean, it's the way that whole thing plays out there, people popping out of their apartments. Brad Pitt's like, get the fuck back into your, yeah, I mean, it's tense. It's a really, it's like a car chase sequence basically, but like that level of excitement, I think, plays out. So probably as far as action, it's definitely the peak of the film. And probably about halfway through.
And I just love the noir style, like shot throughout this entire film.
Yeah, the
And
way he's silhouetted.
yeah, like one thing that I really loved was when they're out on the balconies or like the fire escapes, and you see Mills going down the fire escape closest to the camera, and John Doe sliding down the fire escape like a little bit away, and it just looks like it could be a movie from the 40s
North
where
by Northwest or something, right?
yeah,
Or
it looks like you could have like a noir film from the 40s where like this like silhouetted caper slides down the ladder like that. Soon after that shootout, they go back to John Doe's place, and they're like, "Do we like report this shit?" And then Freeman's like, "Well, we can't because we got here on illegal means. Like, don't break that door down." And then
you have to
Mills
remember what a
does
shock that is to the audience, though. Like, I mean, they're like, "What the fuck?" After this big chase, this big shootout, you feel the way Brad Pitt feels. Like, what the fuck are you even talking about? Like, we got the best, But I do like that it Friedman's actually thinking logically about the situation, and that's something I underestimated Seven on. It's very not quite procedural, wouldn't be the right word, but you get what I mean. Like where it does take into account realism. He does break procedure, but at least it considers it. And then he covers his ass by, having the chick, which I mean, he shows some sympathy. He's like, go eat something and whatever. But yeah, he has her testify, that oh yeah, this guy was acting weird and I had him. Yeah, so I called up Detective Mills and whatever, and that's their excuse for being there. But Mills is impulsive. I think that's the important thing to take away from that scene. Is like he can't seem to control himself in that, but kicking down the door, and that certainly comes up later. So, not that anybody could fault him.
and then they find just like an ass load of evidence in the house where like they find all of his notebooks that are not in any particular order at all or any consistent content besides like just like writings of like death and hate and like vile shit. And this is like a small thing and it doesn't seem like a big deal until the end, but there was a photographer, like a media member of the media in one of the crime scenes early in the movie. I think it was Gluttony.
Yeah, I remember.
And took a photo of Brad Pitt's character. So
but
that ends up.
Jason wasn't Spacey, right? So some other dude, wasn't it?
No, it was Spacey, but we just didn't see his face.
That's really cool. I didn't recognize. I thought, yeah, because that didn't make sense to me. I'm like, they made it seem like it was significant, but I didn't remember seeing his face.
Yeah, he put on a voice. He was like, "Ah, what are you doing?" Like, Like,
Yeah, that's probably what was so misleading about it.
I'm just trying to get the scoop here, see? And then they see the pictures that they're developing that he took when he was posing as a media member. And
they're like, fuck, we had him. Yeah, that's the
yeah.
part I didn't understand, but now it makes obviously clicks. But,
Well, the idea shouldn't even for them be like, fuck, we had him. It should be like, it should really be like, fuck, like he knows who we are. Because from that point, once he took the photo of Brad Pitt, that's when the serial killer knows who's chasing him.
No, that's good. Like the movie seems to disguise that, though. I don't think that's a question they really ask themselves, though. But it does obviously come into play later on. As far as his journal entries, I think they're easy to dismiss as being crazy. But I think I actually, when they do kind of say something about him, like one is kind of the blurring of reality. I think is a story he tells in his journal. I mean, it sounds so ridiculous that's probably not true, but I think it's something about like talking to a man pleasantly on the subway. Like he could be anybody. It's a John Doe type encounter. It's just anybody chatting with a man about the weather. But then suddenly he can't stand how nauseating just how mundane and artificial this conversation is. So he starts violently puking on the guy, and the guy is very upset by this. And I mean, so I think it's at that point that we go into fiction. Who knows? Maybe this actually happened, but I think it tells you a lot about the John Doe character's mindset. It starts off as an everyday encounter, and then becomes like he's disgusted by it. He's disgusted by the everyday mundane bullshit, that he sees as being an affront to, society, I guess, but so it's easy to dismiss, but I think it says a lot about him, actually, if you like think about it. So
they don't find any fingerprints in the entire apartment, which is from him, like dissolving and shaving off his prints. Like one of the next scenes after that is the lust scene, which is another, well, they're all fucked up, but this is like the last like extreme fucked up one, I think. The other ones are more psychological in my opinion.
This one's still psychological because it's edited around in such a way where you don't understand what's happened till after you've seen everything, which I think is really well done throughout the movie, where once you understand the implication, it becomes like retroactively horrifying. Say, like even at the very end with the box, like a lesser movie would have maybe shown that or something, but like I think it knows. Again, I think it's something that where like people would criticize it for being, you think of Saw and how gratuitous all of that is. I think it's very conscious of what to show and what not to. It's very good at that.
You're exactly right. And then, but for Lust, what happens is there's this crowded, like underground club, like brothel area, dimly lit, just kind of dark, like skeezy looking place.
Red light district.
Red light district. And the other officers are already on the scene and they're leading the detectives to there, and they're like, you got to see this. And turns out like there's this John with like this weird, we don't really see it get a clear view of it right away, but like we see like an apparatus like around his junk, and he's like, get this thing off me.
But we see that he's bound up, and I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but he's just like, get it the fuck off me. Get it the fuck off. Like, we don't know what he's talking about, and then I think we see after, like, there are some things that are set up in the sex shop or this custom made place. And then it's just really clever about adding up all the pieces. And then by the end of it, you understand, like, I think it shows the actual apparatus, and then we fully understand what the fuck just happened. The woman is obscured by, I think, a shoulder or head or something. Like,
yeah, the woman's obscured, but most of this scene plays out in the interrogation room, where that's where Morgan Freeman shows pictures of the apparatus to the pimp, and it's like, what the fuck do you think about that shit? And like that kind of thing. And that's where we see that it's like this belt or girdle that has a gigantic fucking knife attached to it. And
Which, at the peril of sounding insane, I think says a lot about John Doe. I think again, you're taking an act that most people don't think anything of, and he's saying it's violent. It is. I think it says something about, like, again, the casualness, and then John Doe's interpretation of what these casual encounters really mean by stabbing somebody to. I maybe I'm not quite bridging it. I just sounded say with the. I got to cut the hair. The hair doesn't help. But like so.
um,
Um,
I think I know what you're saying, where it's like, where this would be a clear difference between Somerset and John Doe, where Somerset could probably see a scenario where he would want to, like, maybe shoot a defense attorney or something that's totally dirty and shit. But like, prostitutes are prostitutes. Like, they're not ultra amoral on just for be like doing that. You know what I mean?
well, right, and that's how most people look at it. But again, John Doe sees the violence in mundane everyday life. I think is what he's like. Most people are apathetic to casual sex and casual everything. I think he's rebelling against that apathy by, and I think for the first time, probably using it correctly, by taking everything to its pathological extreme. And I think that's his point.
Like you had just explained in one scene where he just, whether it actually happened or not, wrote about just vomiting on a guy saying, talking about the weather,
Right.
which, yeah, small talk's annoying, but I don't think anyone here is like, I'm going to murder the next person that small talks with me. But John Doe might.
Like, right. No, yeah. No, he thinks that guy's as guilty as anybody, you know, like, so that's kind of, you know, I think it gives you a great insight into how he views everything. So, and his murders obviously say a great deal about that. Like you said, everything's a loosest interpretation of, like, I mean, with lust, I mean, he describes later on, you know, a disease spreading whore. Like she's spreading the disease of apathy, I think, to some degrees. I know I'm reading into it a bit there, but I think that's what, like, he's probably thinking in that direction, where it's like, you know, it's not just, she's spreading the problem.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And then, like, in the interrogation room, I think one of the better scenes with Somerset is he's interviewing the pimp. You know, he's interviewing the pimp, and forgot exactly how the back and forth goes, but it really boils down to an argument between Somerset and an argument with kind of reality. You know what I mean? Like the reality that he's sort of that he has raged against. That's like kind of the apathy. And the next scene is actually the bar scene that we went into so much on. So that's why this makes sense. Is that,
yeah, I think he just runs the club. I don't know if it's a cat or what you'd classify it as, but
right,
you know, they're
in professional terms,
I think
he might be a club owner, but for all intents and purposes, he's a pimp.
Right. There are rooms where things happen, and that's where the money is, or at least some money is made. So, but he asks him about, he's like, you know, do you like what you do? And he says, no, but that's life. And I mean, it's again, it sounds really simple.
You know, and then he kind of defends in his own, like, I think he says something about, you know, we get a lot of stuff in here. We get drugs, we get money, we get hookers, like, you know, he's more.
And you see that earlier with the guy who created the cock with a fucking knife attached to the end of it. He's like, I've seen weirder shit than that. This is my job. I make things, you know?
You kind of sympathize with the pimp, I think, actually, because he, like, at this point in this movie world that we're in, we're like, this shit is fucked, man. Like, there is nothing good about this world. Like, and we become nihilistic at this point. And then the pimp is just kind of reinforcing that by being like, hey, I mean, some people are going to want to, like, do drugs to escape this. Some people are going to want easy sex to escape this. I'm just here.
There's a market being created, and I I fill that void,
Yep,
basically.
I fill that void, and I'm just here to provide. So the pimp doesn't see himself as a bad guy. It does show that he is kind of questionable in character in that his apathy extends to the point of, oh, that knife thing, I've seen worse than that. Like,
it just shows that there's even more people that are just doing this because it's a business. It's just something that I provide. Who am I to ask why?
and
Well, I think any amount of thinking, like, yeah, it might be a display piece, but there's always the possibility somebody's going to use that knife cock thing. I mean, I guess on that level, like, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to draw the line, or what's just going to be some freaky fetish thing that's, just window dressing or whatever.
yeah, and we don't actually know how like that thing was snuck in, but basically the guy had the like John Doe had the gun to the guy's head and made him.
Well, yeah, that comes because Freeman's asking, did you see anybody carrying a bag, into the place? And he's like, this is. He says that people, that's all they do. Everybody's bringing a bag into the place. Yeah, so they can't pin it down. They can't say who it was, but so he's smuggling this cock knife thing, and and then puts the cock gun in the. There's a lot of sexual imagery in but that guy's acting was just chilling, and he's like, hey man, I fucked her, I did, and like you don't even understand what he's talking about until you see finally it all clicks with the picture, and you're like, holy shit, like it's probably one of the it's a fucked up moment, but that guy's acting was. He's hyperventilating. He's like, I had to do it. Like God.
He had the gun in my mouth. He had the gun in my throat.
Right. It was bad. I didn't remember that at all. I was like, that was fucked up,
So after this scene is where we get the bar scene, and that's why you can see that they were why Somerset was raging against like apathy, because he was kind of directly having the last thing we saw was him like talking to the pimp, who is kind of sort of the like a big like shiny like sign of apathy.
But it's interesting that again, I mean, I think you were kind of getting at it that Freeman still judges him, which he shouldn't. If he's fully accepting of apathy, then he shouldn't be judging this guy. He should just know how it is,
Some of that could be just drunk slurring too, because sometimes when people are drunk, like they'll complain about something, but they'll complain about something that they're actually guilty of. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like hypocrisy is kind of out the window.
I think it's Morgan Freeman actually makes the point of like why you should inadvertently of why Brad Pitt's like, yeah, he's agreeing with everything Freeman's saying. He's like, yeah, and the fact that he's adverse to all of that still in the face of everything that Freeman's saying is, it's not easy. He's doing the hard thing. He's resisting that, and so you actually, it was kind of the moment that actually surprisingly took me back a bit, because I for being idealistic, it's not easy necessarily to be idealistic, and and so I thought that was interesting that it made the case for both characters.
And then after the bar scene, we have Pride, which is probably the least talked about. Woman's tied to a bed. In one hand is super glued a phone. Right. In another hand is super glued sleeping pills. And her nose has been cut off. And she's a model, so she was most likely probably pretty vain and proud of her outward image, to the point where like this is like a case where John Doe didn't directly kill this person, but basically set it up for them to have a psychological like mind fuck and kill themselves, because
that's the thing that's sort of ambiguous about all the murders. It's like the varying degrees to which he's actually the killer. I mean, at the end of the day, obviously he's killed all these people. But it's sometimes it's direct. In the case of gluttony, I mean, that guy.
With that one though, you could just be like, you could just make John Doe shoot you. You know what I mean? You could just be like, no, I'm not going to eat. Shoot me.
I suppose that's right. Yeah. I mean,
But he might go a little crazier on you, but I don't know.
all of these deaths, he's not overly concerned with it completely being by their hand because as far as he's concerned, they've sown their own fate, but it is certainly a factor that like these are all, I mean, I know it seems obvious, but it's something that maybe a little more attention should be paid to, that he definitely sees these people as sleeping in the bed that they've made.
That's a perfect way to put it.
In the case of Sloth, it's definitely the perfect way of putting it, but
like the prideful model chooses to kill herself rather than live,
right.
Ugly.
Yeah, the pill bottle in one hand and the phone for 911 in the other. I guess I could have fucked up his plans, if she called 911, but he was so certain that she wouldn't.
And then after that scene is directly after that scene is, I think, probably my favorite shot in the movie is this tracking shot. And this is the point when it stops raining and the movie becomes clear. The purposes become clear.
That's cool.
It's just this beautiful tracking shot on the roadside across from the precinct. And we're looking at Mills and Somerset walking into the precinct, but we stop upon a taxi cab having stopped, and John Doe gets out. And we don't see his face just yet, but you see him start walking towards him. And I just love the scene because it's that beautiful stuff, that beautiful kind of visual you get from it having rained for a long period of time, and all of a sudden it's sunny and the pavement is very wet. Everything is very kind of
illuminated by that warm light, right?
Yeah, there's almost a steam coming off of everything that
those summer showers are
bounces
just
off light.
That, like that kind of.
Yeah, like summer showers. Yeah. I just love that specific shot. That's just a tracking shot.
No, I know.
And then,
shoots things so beautifully that, no, I get what you mean. It's who knows if there's significance or not. It's just beautiful. Yeah.
So. I think the only significance would be, I think that the scene is telling us is that the rain has stopped and things are about to get a lot more clear right now. And when he walks into the precinct, it just starts off with this creepy detectives. John Doe trying to get his attention, and then he just screams, "Detectives!"
Yeah, because it almost feels like things aren't going the way he imagined. It's you're fucking with it by walking away. Don't right? I mean, sort of.
Yeah, almost like a movie in his head. Okay,
right.
I imagined that when I came to the precinct, you would be here and here, but you're over there,
and nobody notices. He's because it's kind of one of those things where he's you might think he's a witness because he's covered in blood. You might think that he's just there to write down a statement or something. Everybody just ignores him, even though they shouldn't. This guy's covered in blood. It's he looks completely, but yeah, it's just not playing out the way he imagined. And then so he demands their attention, just like he's demanding society's attention. It kind of says something about, yeah.
Exactly. And then he gets pinned down. There's blood all over his hand and his shirt, and this is important. They find 3 traces of blood. They find his blood, and then they find Pride's blood. Yep, because he had just killed her, and then a third unidentified person.
Yeah.
Which we're getting, which it'll be identified soon.
Yeah.
And he's in the interrogation room, and we see that he's got the bandaged fingers. He takes a tea bag and dips it in his tea or whatever the hell he's drinking. I don't drink coffee or tea.
Oh, you don't?
No, I'm just telling. I told you that earlier today. I'm just telling that to the audience.
No, I don't remember you saying you don't drink coffee or tea.
No, I actually don't drink any caffeine. I haven't drunk caffeine since freshman year of college. I went through 3 years of college without caffeine.
That's fucking impressive.
That should round up to a doctorate.
That should. But I mean, you still did coke,
right? Yeah. I forgot how they mentioned that he was wealthy, but they did say that he was independently wealthy, or he had a good amount of money. Well, I think they kind of figured that out where they found all his cash.
Right. Yeah, he
in
had
his apartment.
inherited a large sum. That tends to be a reoccurring thing with all these serial killer movies. They've always inherited a large sum of money that allows them to do what they do with impunity.
Right, because they
And
can't sustain a job. Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, and then and a classical sort of education, I think something like that comes
Unless
up. You know,
American Psycho, he I forgot how he got his money, but he was
because of
kind of
daddy, yeah, it's nepotism. So daddy got him hired at the corporation or something. So
okay. That did happen. Okay,
yeah,
I thought it might have been he got into it himself, but
no, he was a
still
nepotism
psycho.
case, but
John Doe's lawyer comes out, and it's kind of funny because Mills for a second kind of has the vibe of, oh, what the fuck are you gonna tell us? Like, we know he's the guy,
yeah,
and like Mills is underestimating the like how crafty both John Doe and his lawyer are, where he's
right.
like he's gonna give you a full confession if you two go with him to find the last two bodies. And
And that's the
then
thing. Even though that's so absolutely gift wrapped, again, the movie, who knows how realistic it is, but the movie is smart in echoing the sentiments of the audience, where you're like, well, no, wait a minute. This fucker wants us to do that. You know what? Let the bodies rot. And then the movie makes a compelling case against why that would not be, you can't do that. Because if that became public knowledge that you could have identified these bodies and it just makes it out there, you know, that you chose not to, well, people are going to be pretty pissed about that. You know, but why, as the audience, you're like, well, fuck this guy. It's clearly a trap. It's clearly a setup. Don't give him the time of fucking day. But they create a reason why you still have to go through that process, you know?
yep. And then so they eventually agree to it, and they have a scene that I think is like one of the last personal scenes between Mills and Somerset is when they're shaving their chests to tape up
Yeah.
the mic, and you get a foreboding sense of dread out of Mills that you hadn't seen most of the movie, even when other bad shit was going on. Where Mills at first just makes the joke, like, because he's shaving his chest or whatever, he's going to be like, all these late nights, and it's a big red herring. All these late nights out, my wife Tracy's going to think I'm running around. And
Right.
then that basically tells you, all right, he did not sleep at home last night, and he did not wake up there this morning.
There's
So,
another thing I picked up on is that conversation ends with this really ambiguous, just like almost meaningless until you get to like, and it's easy to forget because of the shock of the ending, but it's just like, you know, and he trails off and it doesn't
yep,
go anywhere.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly, because that's what he's thinking. He's like, wait, John Doe
Like
knows
he
who I
senses
am.
something.
John Doe knows who I am. I haven't talked to my wife in 8 hours, um,
Right.
at least. Uh, yeah, you get like that foreboding sense of dread from him, where oh, shit might actually be wrong, but he's too like in the motions of what's going on to
Well,
like
I
check
didn't even see
himself
it
with
being
it.
that logical. I just thought like, you know, like he just talked so casually and then knowing the ending in advance, you know, I was like, it just felt like I always just took that as almost like a sixth sense type thing. Or I'd be like, but you're setting up logical explanations for it that maybe unconsciously he's kind of registering. Just that he
Yeah,
senses something's wrong, something's off, but he can't fully put his finger on it, you know?
yeah, it's a sixth sense voice that he's telling to shut up because he doesn't even want to consider it.
Which is who he is, I think, you know, in a lot of
Yeah,
ways, kind of.
he doesn't want to consider the most negative possible
Right.
scenario. So they're in the car, and then,
Yeah.
um, and this is probably the most memorable. I think the very end is the most memorable scene, but like this is like an iconic scene, and the way it's shot, real quick, is in the car. He is shot to where he is directly flat to the camera, kind of like I am right now, looking right at the camera or just off the camera.
Okay.
And then, but you don't usually see this kind of blocking in a normal scene of a movie because with the rule of thirds is you split the screen into thirds, and
And
you
then
want
the focus is in the middle, right?
well the focus is at an intersecting point. So
Okay.
I like for me to be in the rule of thirds, I would have to be just off like this and like
But then there
looking in
must be a
one
reason that you're
direction.
positioned that way. Like there must be something that the other two sections say about
Right.
like.
There's something I'm looking at, like I'm like looking over there or talking to someone over here. There's a cross cut,
Okay.
but that rule is thrown aside for this
Yeah, that's
because like
like you went to school for this shit. I'm not. I see people mention it, but I don't have a lot of knowledge. Like as far as what you call
yeah there
blocking.
there's
Right.
some funny like mistakes that you'll see people do sometimes um where like they think that they're shooting in the rule of thirds, but like there was someone who like I saw like a famous athlete, like he took a picture of his girlfriend or wife, whatever it was at the time, and she's basically placed right at the end. So she's hugged inside of that third, but she's not over the intersecting point, which is where you want to be.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's like it looks like she's just off in the corner
Oh,
and doesn't matter. But the rule of thirds is you want to go down an intersecting point. Right now, if we put two lines like right here, this is probably where it's kind of at.
yeah, that looks right.
And this is where my head lies, is at an intersecting point.
Right.
So that's where your eye wants to go.
Mhm.
And that, yeah. Okay.
Well,
So anyway, he was blocked, frontally blocked, looking barely off the camera, and it's like a it's like a creepy technique to get focus.
when you're talking
And
about John Doe, right?
yeah,
I,
John Doe
yeah.
is. And it's just a creepy technique to maintain like focus and almost like a creepy level of peering into the viewer, because normally in a movie when you use the rule of thirds, it's one character talking to another. In this movie, the frontal block makes it so that John Doe is talking to the audience and saying, "This is why I do what I do," to the audience.
I think. See,
It's
I get,
almost like breaking the fourth wall, but
no,
without doing it.
I listen to people describe these things because I don't understand. It's really easy to dismiss, but framing does evoke. I think you can run away with it. Like, I mean, you listen to plenty of directors that are just like, we were shooting on the fly. We didn't know what the fuck we're doing, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I there's something I do fundamentally disagree with, and that's the idea. Some people feel this way, and I think these people exemplify, maybe they're like Brad Pitt or something, like where everything has to have order and meaning. And, like that's and there's just no possibility that the director didn't know what the fuck they were doing and there was a time limit and whatever. So, you hear people say nothing is in a movie by accident. I'm like, bull fucking shit.
Yeah.
But definitely deliberate framings that do evoke a response. I think John Doe being in the center, it does, like there's, it forces you to look at him, right? There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
to either side. He's the center of attention,
He's
like he wants to be, and you
Yep.
can't ignore him,
And this is the point in the movie where you cannot ignore him. And I do um I agree. I think there are plenty of mistakes in movies that are happy accidents or just accidents. Um but like
Popularize it like an American Beauty, which ties it, where like, I think the boss's feet are cut off and it's supposed to make him look like more imposing. And God, what's his Sam Mendes is like, yeah, total. I did. This is an accident, happy accident, worked out. Everybody's analyzed it to death, and they make, they do. But yeah, just an accident. I mean, it works, but it wasn't a deliberate thing. So
you can definitely see, especially in a scene as important as this one for this
right.
movie, and the director that we have here, who Fincher's known for demanding like 20 plus takes for simple
I didn't
line
know that.
reads.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. He's so visual that
Yeah, well, and that's one reason he really leaned into digital, like we talked about earlier, because
Oh
now
yeah,
he's
I
like,
suppose it's a hell of a lot harder. with
Yeah,
film.
because you would have to reset so many times. But now he's like, you telling me I can have like 50 tries at this one scene and like 4 of them are gonna be really, really perfect, right? Just by the numbers. And
Right.
then, you know, he can just like, he's a grinder,
Slice them
man.
together.
But he works his actors very hard. But
Shelley Duvall levels of hard, or
no, that's what I was. That's one thing that I was gonna say is like a lot of his actors come back to him because they actually like the way he works because it's almost in his mindset, and I kind of agree that like, you know, and it's also with podcasting in a way too, where it's like I think he goes in the mindset like the first 10 are gonna be shit no matter what, and then they're gonna get all oiled up, they're gonna get loose, they're gonna get, you know, and then they might improv one or here or there just to give it a try, but then keep going back at the same thing. You just keep working it, and then you get it.
Right.
And that's just way more functional in a digital world with digital cameras. So I think that's something he's really embraced.
Yeah, which makes a lot more sense. Yeah, I mean, just
But
pragmatically.
Yeah, and the actors like it though that he's been working with, because you get a lot of actors that just come back to him and talk about how we spent a lot of time on those scenes, but you know, it was worth it in the end. He did find the best out of us. So
Well, and the fact that he works around, say, like Brad Pitt or fucking Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck.
And so he casts him in the perfect role because he's just an average dude, and he works around that and makes it work. And same thing with Pitt, who, you know, again, Pitt's never sunk a movie for me, but he sure as shit has never made one. I mean, but he does bring in the audiences, and I think that the fact that Fincher gets easily one of Pitt's better performances out of this film, and so early into his career, is impressive.
I think Pitt chooses good movies, so I'll give him that credit.
No, I respect Pitt because you know what? He's humble enough to admit that he's not great for fucking everything. And I respect that. He's just like, I can't do it.
That's
you
true.
know?
I mean, he could just be like totally high on himself and everything, but
right.
he surrounds himself around. I don't think he surrounds himself around yes people all the time. He surrounds himself around hard workers like David Fincher. Like he's in a bunch of David Fincher. Like he's kind of David Fincher's De Niro, you know,
well,
in his own way.
Sure. Yeah, because again, Fight Club and Benjamin, but that's something they do with Pitt a lot is they pair him with a great supporting actress, and it seems to actually be time and again Cate Blanchett, who you could, if you want a strong fucking actress to support him, it would be, I mean, short of Meryl Streep, it would be Cate Blanchett. So that's a smart move with a lot of these movies, but yeah, no, I was listening to an interview of Tarantino. I think it was about Inglourious Bastards, where he's talking about like talking to Pitt's agent because for whatever reason Tarantino liked Pitt and wanted to cast him in a movie, and then Pitt was like, "Oh yeah, that'd be great, except I can't do it. Like I know my own limits and I can't do it." And so like Tarantino wrote the Inglourious Bastards role around him, and you know it was great. So so he's smart enough to know like I'm gonna fuck this up like completely, and I just can't do it. Like, which I respect him for. Like that's, you know.
I mean, we sound condescending, like, you know, about like explaining.
Well, I didn't mean. Yeah, I don't mean to be.
Yeah, like, I don't mean to be either, because like, you know, I still think he's like an Oscar-worthy actor, depending on the year, if like, and depending on the role. Because I think, did he win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I hate to say I don't know how much the Oscars are worth nowadays, but I mean, like he was. But again,
I mean, that's been true for a while. But
yeah, no, I haven't kept up with them. And then just recently I've tuned into, like, everybody's like, oh God, it's a train wreck. You have to tune into it. I'm like, okay. I mean, Parasite was good, but it just, in fact, I love Parasite. I'm glad to see that movie getting recognition, but I do have to say, I thought there were like rules, like that's a total foreign film. That used to be like Pan's Labyrinth. Think of all the foreign films that have been nominated. Like,
I mean, they're way behind on that stuff, but
right. So it just feels weird to all of a sudden, because like that's not even that director's best movie, and so I just felt like that was a weird choice, you know.
I guess it's better late than never.
I guess it's really good.
Memories of Murder is you think that one's like you like that one better than Parasite?
Actually, yes and no. Parasite is bolder. I admire Parasite more for being bolder than Memories of Murder. Like, but it's also that boldness, that sort of schizophrenic tone that you see from Snowpiercer that might make it a less accessible movie. Like Memories of Murder is just a straightforward, actually very almost Fincher-esque, like Zodiac. Like if you love Zodiac, watch fucking Memories of Murder, which actually I think came out before. Fucking like it's like that, you know. But Parasite and Snowpiercer are a little more like tonally all over the place, but also because of how daring they are, I think they're more memorable in some ways, you know?
Yeah.
But Memories of Murder is expertly shot. It's a great movie. It's like Zodiac. You love Zodiac, watch Memories of Murder. So that would be my way of putting it.
So in the car ride, like there's a bunch of Mills like is kind of interrogating him, sort of, but it's mostly John Doe playing with him. Mills accuses John Doe of thinking that he's special. Like, what makes you so damn special, or whatever? What makes you a messiah? And John Doe doesn't think he's special. He's not a special person.
Which is something, obviously, with the name John Doe. I mean, that's something you can't ignore, that the movie's making a very deliberate statement by naming its primary antagonist fucking John Doe. And he says exactly that who I am is not important. You know, I'm representative of something larger. So,
and like we were saying before, like he doesn't want to feel special, where every character to some degree that we have seen before wants to feel special somehow. Like, you know, someone's addicted to sex, like they want to feel they want that gratification. Someone's addicted to food, they want that gratification. Whatever,
right.
you know, greed.
And you know, I think that John Doe feels he's seen the larger picture, and so his larger purpose. He's the only person in this world who has a purpose. You know, he's not trying to escape the harsh reality. He's trying to bring it to everybody's attention. You know, and a way that they can. So, you know, they do challenge him on that. You know, like I mean, it plays. Again, I feel there's a bit of misdirection where I feel its religious themes aren't actually that important, but I think the film only in this scene defines its parameters, you know, and like, you know, oh, so you think that God, you know, called upon you. He's like, you can see that he'd like to think that, but even by his own, he's like, God works in mysterious ways. I know this isn't exactly the most holy shit that I'm doing, but it doesn't matter. Like his work is what's important. What he's trying to say is what's important. He's saying people are going to study this, they're going to analyze it. You know, he's very aware of what, yeah. So that's where he's at. It's everything is in what he does, not who he is.
It's clear that, like you were saying, it's clear that he wants to be remembered.
Again, I think it's what he's trying to do. And so, yes, I mean, he's human. I'm sure he acknowledges there's probably some vanity, but the whole point is that what he does, he wants to be studied. You know, not who he is, but what he's doing, the acts, what he's trying to say through his work, through the acts.
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting because he is like a religious martyr. Like this is like at the basement level founded upon like his religious like beliefs to some degree. Because like you see his bedroom, like he goes to sleep under like a red cross and stuff, and it's kind of like creepy.
I didn't notice that, but
yeah, like
but it definitely tells you something that he does entertain at least the idea that,
and
you know,
the interesting thing about this movie, the villain is like this like religious serial killer radical guy, but it doesn't even focus so much on the religious aspect as it does.
That's why I say specifically that the movie is defining its parameters by having John Doe dismiss these challenges, because again, they're the challenges that the audience would put forth, like, okay, you're just a religious fanatic, you're just, you know, and he dismisses all that. So I think it's a film on, it's them acknowledging the issue, but saying, okay, we can see where you the audience would go crazy with all that imagery and all that, but that's not where we are thematically. Sure, you can do that if you want, but really he's trying to say something a lot more specific, It's about his works. It's not about the religious themes. They just serve as a theme. They fit what he's trying to say,
Like,
rather than the other way around.
on paper, he is like a religious psycho killer, right?
Yeah,
But
but it's a
um,
tired trope, and the movie's smarter than that. And I think that's why people love it. It's
right, it
timeless.
is smarter than that because he wants to. It's bigger than that. It's almost like the religion doesn't matter. Like, probably except for like Buddhism, he could pick any religion he wanted to, and like he would have the same perspective on the world. He would have that same
There
negative
were,
perspective. So
go ahead.
really it's he gets this negative life perspective, which is not totally unwarranted, but probably unwarranted.
I think it's what John Doe thinks. Everybody's guilty. Everybody's affecting everybody. And as much as we try to dismiss these things as harmless, he sees a crime in every interaction, And I mean, or rather in the lack of interaction, the lack of consideration, I mean, things that we consider mundane, the almost like a fucked up inversion of Freud's like the psychopathology of everyday life, like which I mean, which is I obviously it's ironic because he's a psychopath, but but I think that's what he sees, and I think that's what he's trying to make everybody aware of.
Right. And this might be a contradiction, but I think he said like that I was chosen for this. And I think that's more rooted though in the fact that like he knows he's he knows he's like crazy where like
Yeah,
he's
right,
like he knows that he doesn't have sympathy for anybody, and all these and that he's capable of these kinds of murders. So
right.
the way he can rationalize it for
Holy
himself
shit.
is
I
that like God made me like this so that I would do this, so that I would show everyone else the error of their ways.
Freeman entertains what he's saying. I think that's the big point there. Brad Pitt absolutely at no point will accept anything that this guy is putting forth. And Freeman does, and he challenges him on some of his ideas. He points out his hypocrisies. He points, like Brad Pitt points out Freeman's hypocrisies. And so I think that really creates this interesting, like Mexican standoff of ideas
Well,
about
and Freeman's character is probably uncomfortable with how much he does relate
that's
to
something I
John Doe
observed. There
because
is so much in common between John Doe and Freeman.
and Somerset
Yeah.
knows it and he's uncomfortable with it because he's like, I fucking hate so many people, but his shred of hope keeps him from keeps him from being like the who gives a shit if the kid saw it guy at the beginning of the movie. It
Yeah.
keeps him from being, because he would probably just be that guy. But even so, the line isn't as big between the two that Somerset would hope.
You see, I mean, it's not something that the movie suggests, but you see somebody like Somerset under the right conditions, locked in a room or something like. I mean, you could start to get the ideas that John Doe gets. There's the start of them. And I think he identifies that. I think that's something that's so fascinating about the film is it acknowledges the beginnings of being insane. I think you don't see that in movies where they acknowledge where something is going to go. And Somerset's very aware. Like he doesn't. He's fighting that.
I also don't think that he's worried about that he's going to become like John Doe. Although there are similarities,
But he
I do
enables
think
it. Like he by his not by thinking the way he does, and I think Brad Pitt articulates his crime almost, which is, I mean, you're as guilty as anybody, and this just perpetuates this by being apathetic. And then he sort of enables somebody like John Doe. Like somebody like John Doe is going to be created by his apathy, and so maybe not him directly, but
I do think that the very idea, though, that Somerset thinks to himself, maybe there is hope. The very idea that he's capable of thinking that there is hope is what will always keep him from being John Doe, though, because
Well,
that's what keeps him in line. That's what keeps him in line in so many ways. I would think.
I get, no, you're right. It's just that you can, I'm sure you can see where that's an easy thing to erode. Hope.
Yeah.
Time is great.
Well,
He's an old
I mean, it
dude.
is pretty fragile even for him in this movie. But
Yeah.
at what point, like maybe then it's like time is like a multiplier, right? So maybe like John Doe was literally never even capable of hope, of like anything, like seeing the good in anything.
Yeah,
You know,
it's a complicated movie. I mean, it's just
yeah,
so Somerset wants to separate himself from his hope and his empathy because I think he identifies that that's the source of, like, that's the bane of his existence. You've got to be like one or the other. You have to be Brad Pitt or you have to be completely apathetic. And he's ripped apart, the agony of being ripped in two, and that's where he's always at. And then I think John Doe probably recognizes, like you were saying, that he can't quite ascend to the martyrdom that he'd like to fancy himself as enduring, because he does enjoy it. He wants to separate himself.
Yeah,
So
it would almost be like if he didn't enjoy it, and like if he wasn't like this, like psycho or whatever, like in that way, that it would almost be more meaningful. Like,
but it's important that Freeman's the one who brings that point to attention, to his attention, because I mean he thinks at least enough in line with John Doe to understand and
communicate with him.
Yeah, which Brad Pitt absolutely won't do. So he has no room for that,
This, like, the last thing in the car that we get is that he mentions, just again, like, don't forget I spared your life.
And John Doe is supposed to kind of evoke that out of the audience, that anybody could be John Doe, anybody could, become this guy. And I think you brought up a point that I think is it takes a hell of a lot to cross that line. I mean, and become full-blown psychopathic killer. But I think that's part of the point of his crimes, is that he doesn't see a distinction. He doesn't see any difference. He sees, like, this is the natural result of what you've done, like it's gonna end in blood and misery and all this, and like it's gonna take society with it, down the whatever drain he's spiraled down. But I think he also highlights with Brad Pitt, he points that out, that he says, well, okay, detective, what would you like to do with me? Somebody like me, you'd like to beat the fucking hell out of me in a locked room? He's like, I absolutely not, and I mean, and but it, obviously it's true. And he says you wouldn't do that because there are rules. It's not that people are separated from their more sadistic, animalistic, instincts or whatever. It's that, there are rules that they're too scared to break that keep them from it. And he says, well, no, think about that. And then think about the next step and the next step. And then eventually you end up at John Doe, I think is kind of, I'm oversimplifying, but I think the sentiment of my statement would be that, that violence does exist in everybody. It's just that they're too scared to tap into it. But there are certain circumstances that society facilitates, or ignores to the point of facilitation, like, I guess it's neglect or whatever, that allow for somebody like this to exist, and him being a person like that, that's what he sees, and that's where he's coming from. So
would you say that there would be a John Doe in any environment, though? Like, let's say everyone was like damn near like celibate and ate like vegans. Like, I feel like there'd still be a version of John Doe in that world, even if none of the 7 deadly sins took place, like, were a thing.
I think it's that idea across the board that you're having your cake and you're eating it too. You're not facing the consequences of your actions. You're not like, and again, if you commit to a single person, obviously there are consequences you accept there, that might very well suck for you. But people feel an intrinsic sense of justice and injustice, but having both and being able to bail out whenever you want, and evade consequence. People feel it's not fair, it's cheating, and enough of that. And I think you have somebody like John Doe, and you see his sense of justice is quite fucked up, but I don't think it's entirely estranged from what people maybe feel from time to time. Yeah, it's not necessarily the act itself. It's people really rail against unfairness.
Yes, that's a good point, because that's when I posed the question, do you think in a world where these 7 deadly sins are not committed, do you think a John Doe exists, or do you think John Doe thinks a John Doe exists?
Right.
But you make a good point where it's just, them skating by, where, he has a fucked up perception of like who's guilty and not. Like that might persist to some degree, like that kind of hatred towards like people, like unfairness, like you said.
Well, yeah, well, right. I mean, across all of these, almost you could, not quite, but a lot of them is the idea of taking. You did like greed and gluttony and sloth. I mean, you're taking and taking. You're not worthy of the air that you're breathing, and that's who this guy is. So,
he makes the point towards the end of the car ride. Don't forget, I spared your life, detective.
Yeah.
Towards Mills, and that's when this gets really fucked up. All right. So this scene is a very famous scene. It's the climax of the movie. Is where we get envy and wrath, and they're out in the middle of this remote location in the middle of what looks like the desert, which kind of, as we talked about earlier, kind of messes.
Our sense of location.
Yeah, our sense of geography, but maybe this is like, you know what I mean? This might be one of those happy accidents that we were talking about, where like they might have just been filming in LA and wanted to film with a lot of rain, and then they might have wanted to make it like New York. But regardless, the happy accident is it becomes any American city. It could be Southwest, it could be North Midwest, it doesn't matter.
I mean, you could see the localized area, like land being kind of dug up and whatever, but there's, as far as we can see, desert. So that's what really kind of, for me, fucked it up. I wasn't sure where this took place at that point.
Yeah, and there's like power lines and like this like trailer, which is probably the only address within like maybe even 100 miles.
Right.
John Doe starts walking them out to find the 2 bodies. He's like, they're just over here, and all of a sudden we see like this delivery truck zooming by, and they tell John Doe to get on his knees, and as they secure the area.
That's the whole thing about that scene, is like they take every precaution. Like that's again where the movie is very smart. It's thinking on the level that the audience thinking of. Who knows if that'd be real procedure, but the movie is like, we're not going to take a fucking chance, because the audience would fucking kick us in the ass for that, right? So the audience knows this is a trap, it's a setup, and everything they do is like filtered through that. Like, you're like, okay, fuck this truck, something's up with this fucking guy, and like it's just, everything is it's easy to maybe just gloss over, but I'd like to do a shout out, but I'd like to, praise the film for that. Like it covers its ass, and not in a half-assed way. Like a lot of things do that. They cover it, but it's half-assed. Like this is completely thinking in the direction that the audience is.
And Somerset goes to check out the delivery truck and interrogate that guy real quick, and then he's like, I have a package for David Mills.
When you think something's up because it's speeding towards us, it's like speeding, but it's because he has to get it there on time. He's being paid
exactly the right time. He has to be there exactly the right time. He's like, this guy paid me like a bunch of fucking money. And then it's this box that's, I'm gonna just say it, it's like a head-sized box.
I wonder what could be in it.
And like it's funny because there's like I don't think there was music through the entire sequence, but there was always like a chopper noise or something, And then
It
when
was,
we're
but it was
waiting,
very ambient music. I mean, or maybe it just starts when he opens it. Maybe I'm misremembering.
right? Well, it got really quiet when he was like it
Yeah,
was the most still when he was thinking about opening it. Like it almost felt
like oh,
like just like
something.
one of those quiet those quiet when you're like in the middle of a field or something by yourself and it's just so dead quiet and you're like there's it's just him in the
Which
box and
no,
then
again, that's something that's easy to gloss over. But so many movies get it wrong. So many movies get silence wrong, or they don't know when to use it, or they use it too much. They overestimate how good they are at using it. And here, yeah, you're right. I remember like that scene is very uncomfortable because it's really the first moment of silence. You don't know what's in the box. You don't know what's going to happen. You're completely, and there's no music telling you what to think. And I think that ties in with our other most drunken, horrible podcast, Breaking the Waves, where where music doesn't dictate what you're supposed to think. And yeah, so you're completely. I think, yeah, actually, now that you point out, though, that was probably a very deliberate thing where it's like the music doesn't tell you what to think because you're not supposed to, it's a mystery. And, the music would give that mystery away. If it's
yeah
ominous, if it's sad, yeah. So,
and then he opens the box and while this is happening John Doe keeps like just talking to Mills whether he thinks Mills is listening or not. He's just like I'm I'm very envious of you. And then we don't see what's in the box, but we see Somerset open the box and he's shocked and he turns around and he's like, Mills, and starts like running that way. And then this is when it really heats up. Music builds, everything is
yeah.
back online, and
It's like, stay away now. Stay away. John Doe's got the upper hand. He's
stay
like,
away,
you're
stay
like,
away from here. John Doe has the upper hand.
like, what the fuck could it be? It's like there's some blood, and I mean, and I don't know if audiences would have caught on or not. It's that's one of those things. It's like Psycho. Like who know? Probably a lot of people know what happens, but I almost it matters. But God, the way this is shot, even I knew what the fuck was going to happen, and like I mean, I was surprised at how disturbed I was by it. So I think it's timelessly powerful, even if like if you know what happens, I wouldn't say don't watch Seven. I'd say still fucking watch it.
That has always been the true mark of like a good, like even before like we made this podcast or anything.
I
Like
remember
the
you saying that's like our mission statement. It's like a good movie will survive being spoiled. I don't. That's I try to avoid
it
it,
will.
but
Like if you can avoid it, and I mean, we're gonna reiterate this because you may have not seen our earliest videos, but we're like our cutoff limit's probably like 5 years. Anything older than 5 years, if it's spoilt to you, it should still be good. Otherwise, it's probably not that good. John Doe is still talking to Mills and is like, "I'm envious of you. I'm envious of your life and your pretty wife." And
yeah,
then that's what gets Mills to fucking stop and be like, "What the fuck did you say?" And then he's like, I tried to play, or I paid your wife a visit this morning. We tried to play husband and wife, but it didn't work out." And then he's like,
so I took a souvenir.
yeah, so I took a souvenir, her
Head.
pretty little head. And then like at that point, like I don't know, we're all like in Somerset's shoes now where uh Somerset gets there and he's like, "Don't listen to him. Don't listen to him." And
Yeah,
he's
put
like, "Well, like, what
yeah,
did he say? What did he say? What was in the
yeah,
box, man? What was in the
right.
box?" And that's, I mean, everyone at least knows a reference to that scene, but that's what this, but if you've only ever heard the reference and never seen the movie, what's in the box comes from this movie. So basically, his whole game the entire time was John Doe's not even impervious to a deadly sin. Like he was envious, and then the
That's the
last,
thing that makes him so scary is that he includes himself in this whole scheme.
yeah,
He's as guilty as anybody to his own mind, and that's what separates him and makes it really fucking yeah.
John Doe's envy because he was envious of living a normal life.
Normal,
He
not
was
being a serial killer.
he's envious. He's envious of naive, hopeful
Yeah,
Mills. He's
more
envious
specifically,
of
yes.
having hope. He coaxes Mills into becoming Wrath. John Doe mentions, "You should have heard her beg for her life and the child inside her." And then that's
Yeah, the
when
baby.
Somerset just pistol whips him.
King,
And he's like,
you know,
"Oh."
Somerset knows it's you can't recover.
And he's like, "Oh, he didn't know." Because Mills
You
didn't
know,
know.
part of that's him for telling her not to tell Pitt. I mean, who's to fucking say you'd handle that? If we're talking, you're gonna handle it better. It's like fucking goddamn decimal points. But still, I mean, the shock of just even learning she was pregnant in that moment. There's, you know, it's definitely the thing that.
And this is when we bring out the child in Brad Pitt's character again, because his eyes like flush like a kid's dog died or something. You know what I mean?
One of easily the highlights of Brad Pitt's career. There's just something about it like that. You keep thinking it's the moment. And it's, I mean, he can't, the pain, I mean, it just keeps sinking in. He can't, I mean, I don't know. I've never seen another movie like that where he doesn't just fucking cap him.
It looks like a physical gut punch. Like it looks like someone actually just punched him in like square in the stomach.
Oh, he's like, and he's looking to Freeman like he wants him to tell him something. Like it's not even. I think the audience
he looks to Freeman to be like
tell me it isn't true. Say it's
like
yeah. In fact, he says it like that's not true. That's not true. He's you know right. And you know, like he's in denial. This is the moment for this. I imagine whatever that moment is for people, and some people never fucking reach it. I think some people manage to get through all of life fucking dancing around, ever getting hit by that bullet of reality. But imagine getting hit like this in this moment with the absolute fucking, I mean, nobody has to,
there's almost a part of it where Brad Pitt's like, where Mills is looking to Somerset, like, tell me not to shoot him too. You know what I mean?
And Somerset can't, I mean, yeah, he doesn't know.
Somerset can't. Somerset's too, like, he's like, it's fucking over. There's no way you're not going to shoot him. There's no way you're not going to shoot him.
He tries, he says, yeah, I mean, if you shoot him, he'll win, but he knows it's not enough. I mean, he just, I mean, it's not. It's, God, it's just a horrible.
Nothing would be enough. And they both know that. And Mills is realizing it. And again, like it's almost like a tantrum that he throws like a kid. Like, I'm so glad you brought that up because I didn't think of this movie like that before. Because he's like, no, it does. Like, it seems, you know,
it's interesting.
Like it's almost like a tantrum, and I mean that in a very positive way to Brad Pitt. I'm not trying to say,
but like where somebody never bothered to tell their kid about death, right? This is something that's so
like
that,
you see,
no, that's really good. Yeah, no, like where a kid has a sense of it, but nobody's formally explained it, and so they have to work through this on their own because somebody thought they were sparing them or something, you know, and like they know it's there, they've been evading it, but they don't have whatever the fuck it is that's required to acknowledge it formally. And it's, you know, it's like, that kind of denial, like, you know, fucking, I don't know, Spot's not dead. He's at the happy farm upstate, you know, wherever the fire, like he just has no room for this. It's all flooding in, drowning him in this fucking moment, you know? And yeah, because this thing that's protected him this whole fucking time is finally stripped in the worst fucking way that nobody's ever going to face. But that's, again, the point. Spacey makes sure that this is something that even somebody like Mills can't ignore. It's something that, you know.
And he has to live with the thought that John Doe spared him. And if John Doe would have just killed him by that garbage truck, his kid and his wife are probably alive because they have he has no reason to weave him into the role of Wrath. It was just, you know, like a byproduct. Like he had to kill a cop. Like he could have just been a cop that he had to kill. But
Right.
he said no. He chose to say no. Brad Pitt did, Mills. Because when he had the gun to his head, he said, no. And so he begged for his life. And John Doe gave him his life.
I mean, he did it, but I think he was in denial of the situation again, where it's just he couldn't.
Yeah,
I mean,
that could be like he was just again in denial. No, I'm supposed to win the shootout. The good guy wins the shootout.
not even that, but just he's a person who won't. I mean, he doesn't acknowledge it formally, but he just doesn't have room for the worst possible outcome because he figures that is it. So there's no point in fretting about it. But as this shows, the worst possible outcome can let you survive it.
Mills could have done things differently in that chase to where he forces in some way John Doe to kill him, and that would have been a preferable outcome than what actually happened. He's going to drive himself insane if, just thinking about things he could have done differently.
There are interesting things where it's like, in a sense, Mills is the more experienced man. He's been shot at and he's fired his gun more than Freeman has, which sounds really like he watched somebody die. He watched a cop get hit in the shoulder, which, that's almost a common thing now where people point, getting hit in the shoulder. There's a fucking artery. And this film acknowledges it, that like this guy got taken in the shoulder, but he dies and Mills is with him in the ambulance. And it's like this, it's this moment where he can't remember even the guy's name, because again, I think he doesn't have room for it. He can't, think of how meaningless that really might be. The fact that this guy's just dead and gone like that, I think the movie's confrontational in that way. It's not just Freeman as the older, more experienced man. In ways, Pitt is more experienced, but the thing that allows him to face all of it, he's seen the same things Freeman's seen. He all the horror, all these deaths, all these murders, but he has this armor, this he doesn't have room for the possibility that these are normal. This isn't something that exists. It's not natural. It's not, it's people isolated. It is a part of the world. This ties together with Die Hard. It's something that exists and you can't deny it. It will force its way into your everyday life.
And a calling card of wrath is passion. And he's, because, that's when you have a crime of passion. Like, it's not like this cold-blooded thing. He's passionate guy. You can kind of tell, like, he enjoys art with his wife. He's very affectionate towards his wife. They have like, just young couple passion. And it's the passion that can flip into wrath is what it is. Because some people could feel like, oh, I feel justified, so in cold blood, I will now kill John Doe. But that's not what it is. It's like that might be Morgan Freeman. Like Somerset is colder inside than Mills. So that's why Somerset isn't wrath, because Somerset can actually, like, you know what I mean? Like, relate to John Doe.
It feels like something that Somerset should be confronted with, but instead it's Brad Pitt. I think the film just throws something at you that is undeniable. I mean, there's no version of your pregnant wife's head is served to you in a fucking box that you could possibly, oh yes, revenge isn't the answer. That's just wrong. But still, for this character, if ever there was a moment where all your illusions, whatever the fuck you think about the world, is just shattered, it's there. It's something that you can't reconcile. And that's what I think is brilliant about this film. You'd be hard goddamn fucking pressed to present another scenario where,
they throw Mills in the back of the cop car, and Somerset's, he says, take care of him, would you? And then sun is setting, and Somerset says, I'll be around, which tells me that he's not actually going to retire. Somerset feels that he's too far into it, and he's like, this is what I am now.
I read that a different way. I actually read it as being very fucking amazingly optimistic. And I think it's only how bleak this ending is that lends itself to that optimism.
So after he says, I'll be around, it switches to voiceover. And he says, Ernest Hemingway once wrote, the
World's a
world is
fine.
a fine place and worth fighting for.
Right.
I agree with the second part. He doesn't think the world is good, so he can relate to the apathetic people, but he still thinks it's worth fighting for. So that's how he doesn't relate to the apathetic people.
Basically, Brad Pitt's indictment that you're quitting because of the things you're saying. I believe that you want to believe the things you're saying because you're quitting. You're giving up on the world. You're turning your back on the world. And you need to justify that. And you want me to go along with it so that you can walk away. And, you know, so he puts live in a cabin in the fucking woods and away from everything. And which actually Friedman, I think, non-jokingly brings up throughout the film that I bought a farm upstate or some shit, which is basically where Brad Pitt's come from. You know, he wants to get away from the city. Brad Pitt's coming into the city. It's just kind of this endless cycle of the city eating people. But it's a very nowhere in that way. There's always a city and it always eats people. But that last quote, I absolutely agree with it, but it's very bizarre that it's almost being optimistic by saying Somerset has come away from this experience almost rejuvenated. I feel like this should be something that would totally shatter his views on the world, but instead I think it's actually clarified them. I think he's accepted that the world isn't worth giving up on. He's not going to give up on it. It's made him aware of the struggle, and it almost feels like a mythic, you know, struggle between good and evil, this barren landscape. I mean, there's something almost allegorical about it, the way that the last scene plays out. You know, it feels, I don't know, biblical, mythic, whatever, something. But then to quote Ernest Hemingway and almost undermine, I mean, here's somebody who like lived through both world wars. I mean, if anybody is, you know, is afforded some optimism, it would probably be Ernest Hemingway, the most depressing bastard ever.
I feel like there's a lot of pride in his stuff though, because like a lot of it is like writing war like in very glorious terms.
That's how I read Hemingway, where it's like pointless and it's just futile, but there's like a triumph in the futility. It's, you know,
I think that triumph in the futility is the key to Somerset, because at the end, because you make the point that it almost seems triumphant for him to be like, yeah, now I'm gonna like just do this forever. But really, I think that is a prison sentence in itself.
yeah, no, yeah,
But
he's not going to win that. He's not going to make things right in the
the
try.
additional motivation after all of this might have actually been that John Doe won. Because since he knows that John Doe won, he has no other choice but to try to. I think he's beyond thinking that
But
he can
I
make
think he
anything
feels a
better.
sense of responsibility where it's like, even if
That's
this is
it.
right.
Even if he's going down with the ship,
Yes,
he has to captain it.
right. Responsibility. And that you can't just walk away. You can't turn your back on the world, you know, is what I guess
And
I'm trying to say.
and he knows that he's at the very least capable of seeing some kind of hope in humanity, where we hardly ever see it, but the only reason we do see it is when we draw the comparisons between him and John Doe, which there's
Yeah.
at least a difference there. And I feel like that difference is good enough for Somerset at this point, because if the line really is that thin, any difference matters. And,
Right.
you know, that's where he gets that sense of responsibility from. I think it's more of a crutch, though. Like, I feel like he just fell 10 stories and landed on a single pillow of optimism, but that's all he has. You know, if does that
It
make
is, but I do think it's enough because that's all of life. I mean, life is hard, and I think he's resigning himself to facing that hardship. As pointless as it is, he understands his role in it, as futile as it is. So yes, it might be like Sisyphus or something. It might be completely pointless, but at the end of the day, by taking on that responsibility,
he's a gatekeeper between civilization and madness, is what he is.
right,
Because he's seen both
and
sides of
he's in
it.
the perfect position.
All right, so Dakota, what rating out of 5 stars are you going to give David Fincher's Seven?
4.5.
4.5. I'm actually, I definitely had it at least 4.5. Sometimes, you like the movies more after you talk about them. Like even with Johnny Mnemonic, I liked it more after we talked about it. You
Actually,
know,
it's probably true of me too. Like I recognize more ridiculous moments, but after like seeing that you enjoyed them as much as I did, I was like, actually, yeah, that doesn't come along every day, you know.
yeah, I mean,
So
the ratings might not always reflect it as clearly, but you know, the review is in the review. The review is not in the stars. That being said, I'm feeling like I'm just gonna go out and give this one 5 stars. It'll be my second 5-star rating so far. All right, folks, thank you for hanging out for this super dark movie.
yeah,
It was still pretty fun, really good movie. Really like David Fincher. Yeah, I think we're gonna kind of go into the thing where we don't actually know how to end these things, and that's gonna be our shtick.